Hey guys, what's up? I want to talk about a very hot button issue that's been going around the news a lot recently. I want to break it down, but I don't want to do it in the way that most YouTubers have been doing. I want to look at it very objectively, hands off. We're going to avoid emotion as much as we can and just break it down to try to look at it objectively, both in this specific instance and then as a broader issue within the industry as a whole. Because I think that there's potential for a lot of people to just get emotional about this. It's very easy for a YouTuber or journalist to just get upset about stuff because that gets clicks, makes us money. That's what's easy. It's much harder to have an actual viewpoint and to try to inform what's going on. And that's what we're going to try to do in this video, because that's just what should be done. So the first thing to do is to understand what's going on. And first of all, before I do that, I just want to apologize for my voice. I am fighting off a pretty bad sickness. So that's why I sound kind of like a penguin getting an enema. But nonetheless, what was going on was basically a man by the name of Dan Houser, who's one of the co-founders over at Rockstar Games. He did an interview with New York Magazine talking about the development of Red Dead Redemption 2 and all the stuff that went into it. And one thing that he said got a lot of people really upset for some reason that continues to baffle me. Basically, what he said was, quote, and this is coming from the New York Magazine article, quote, "The polishing, rewrites, and re-edits that Rockstar does are immense. We were working 100-hour weeks several times in 2018. The finished game includes over 300,000 animations, 500,000 lines of dialogue, and many more lines of code. Even for each Red Dead Redemption 2 trailer and TV commercial, we probably made 70 versions, but the editors may make several hundred. Sam and I both make a lot of suggestions, as will other members of the team." End quote. Now, just that small little section, that small quotation, got tons of people upset. Lots of YouTubers pounced on this because that's what we do, apparently. And it turned into boycott calls, people asking their viewers and fans to not buy the game, to be upset about this, to set the standard, to show Rockstar it was not okay to encourage or romanticize 100-hour work weeks. Now, let's calm down. Let's look at this objectively. Is he calling and romanticizing 100-hour work weeks? I don't think so. It seems more like he was talking off the cuff. But nonetheless, he responded to Kotaku, who did a follow-up with him, and this is what he said in response. Now we're going to break this down. He said, quote, "There seems to be some confusion arising from my interview with Harold Goldberg. The point I was trying to make in the article was related to how the narrative and dialogue in the game was crafted, which was mostly what we talked about, not about the different processes of the wider team. After working on the game for 7 years, the senior writing team, which consists of 4 people, Mike Unsworth, Rupert Humphreys, and Laszlo and myself, had, as we always do, 3 weeks of intense work when we wrapped everything up. 3 weeks. Not years. We have all worked together for at least 12 years now, and we feel we need this to get everything finished. After so many years of getting things organized and ready on this project, we need this to check and finalize everything. More importantly, we obviously don't expect anyone else to do this work this way. Across the whole company, we have some senior people who work very hard purely because they're passionate about a project or their particular work, and we believe that passion shows in the games we release. But that additional effort is a choice, and we don't ask or expect anyone to work anything like this. Lots of other senior people work in an entirely different way and are just as productive. I'm just not one of them. No one, senior or junior, is ever forced to work that hard. I believe we go to great lengths to run a business that cares about its people and to make the company a great place for them to work." End quote. Now, lots of stuff there to unpack, and we're going to break that down. How I want to tackle this, though, is a little bit differently. First of all, let's just tackle the allegation at the outset, which is that this statement implies that Rockstar encourages people to work 100-hour plus weeks, which is a hot button issue in the gaming industry because crunch is something that lots of people are aware of and lots of people talk about. Basically, the idea that getting up close to the game's release, you're going to start pushing people to work even harder, to stay overnight, to work crazy hours in order to get the game ready for release, instead of pushing the game back and delaying it. It's a hot button issue. It's caused studios to fail, studios to close, which we're going to talk about again in a few minutes. It's a hot button issue. But nonetheless, does this statement imply that that's what Rockstar does? It doesn't. it's kind of ridiculous to say so. The simple quote that he says, quote, "We were working 100-hour weeks several times in 2018 to finish up the game's 300,000 animations and 500 lines or 500,000 lines of dialogue. That's all perfectly normal." Now, normal and good are two different things, but that's perfectly normal. And part of the reason that's normal is because this is an artistic business. This is an artistic venture. Game development is an artistic venture. So these types of things happen. And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff in a minute. But the accusation at the outset that this shows all of a sudden, it opens the door into the corruption and the hypocrisy that goes within Rockstar, that they're taking advantage of their employees to get these games released. It's just not true. Some of the some people have found quotes from like Glassdoor reviews of former employees, some that even worked a decade plus ago at a given Rockstar studio. Those people have said that they had really bad experiences, that they had issues with overworking, with being pushed to keep going in crunch. One particular developer was talking about the time that he worked in QA and wanted to prove himself to everybody else on the team. And so he was working excessively long hours to try to prove himself and to get a job offer within the actual studio. That's all pretty normal, not just in the game industry, but also just in general. If you take an internship, it's pretty common for you to double down and want to prove yourself. So for instance, if you take an internship at a law firm, it's not beyond the realm of reason to assume that you would be doing extra hard work to try to prove yourself to the members of the firm to be brought on potentially once you graduate. That's just what happens. People work extra hard when they want to make a point. That's just something that happens. What he's referring to in this quotation is pretty normal, apparently, within the industry. People who are seniors on the team and want to prove themselves, want to make a real impact, they do so by staying extra long hours in order to finish up their projects, especially when you're a manager, when you're a team lead. That's something that's kind of expected of you in an unspoken way, whether that's good or bad. Now, with all that said, this is a complicated issue. So I want to take it back away from Rockstar and look at crunch as a whole, because that is something that most people agree is an issue within the industry. And I think it's important that we address it, because the idea is basically that once games get close to release, the studio pushes them so hard to the point where you watch these interviews or studio tours. For instance, Bethesda did a studio tour back, I believe it was when they released Skyrim, before all of this was a major issue, and they walk through and they show their studio, and they have bunk beds, they have gym, they have showers, they have kitchens so that they can provide 3 meals a day for all of their employees when they're staying overnight. It's just kind of part of the industry that once you get into crunch, that's just what happens. People stay overnight. Like it's almost just part of the job description. It's very bizarre, but that's what it is nonetheless. I'm not saying it's good or bad. That's just something that's been the case. Now, the question is whether or not that should evolve, whether or not we should end that and the industry should change and move away from that. And of course, I would say yes. If we can avoid people being forced to stay at work overnight leading into a project's conclusion, yes, of course, that would be much better for everybody involved. But before making a suggestion, because I think you can't criticize something without having an honest suggestion, which is why I'm going to suggest one, there has to be some sort of fix, and you have to look at the fix and the potential damages and externalities, if you will, of that decision and the implementation thereof. So one of the solutions, quote unquote, that many people have made to something like this is to look at what is analogous to game development, which in my opinion is something such as any other artistic venture or art. Game development, in my opinion, is an art form, and that's why you see so many people become so impassioned by it to the point where they want to work 100-hour work weeks just for the sake of the project, because they are that invested in this artistic medium that they're involved with, which is really, really interesting to me. But that's a topic for another issue, for another day. So with that having been said, if game development is an artistic issue or a venture, how have other industries tackled overworking of their employees, because this has happened before. So what I would point to is, for instance, the acting industry. For those of you not aware, I do a lot of work with like theaters and things like that for plays and musicals, that sort of thing. It's just kind of a hobby of mine, aside from gaming and all of this. So I do a lot of work with those studios and with those theaters rather. And one thing I've found is that it's pretty common to work excessively long hours and to not be compensated in even a close to reasonable way for that. However, because it's an art, you're willing to do that. So for instance, when you work for a community theater or a state theater, usually you'll get a paycheck, but it's minuscule. Like, it's abysmal compared to the hours you put in. When you factor in like rehearsal times, performance times, call times, when you put in or account for the time you spend working on it, whether it's memorizing, whatever, it becomes minuscule. Like, you're making 50 cents an hour. It's ridiculous. But it's a labor of love in a way. So it doesn't even feel like work at that point. For some people, as weird as it is, game development can get to that point. Now, is that right? Not necessarily. You should be compensated for your work. So what the acting industry did is they enacted unions. They enacted SAG-AFTRA and some of these other like Screen Actor Guilds that work specifically in order to guarantee actors set pay, equity being another union. And effectively what happens is all of these actors join together. They all agree to sign this piece of paper that guarantees that actors will be paid a set amount for a set amount of work, XYZ, and it falls through. So if an equity actor is hired by a theater, they have to pay them according to that. Now, what that does is it guarantees fair compensation. It guarantees that if the theater were to push an actor to the point where they're working 100-hour weeks, getting ready for the next performance or during tech week or whatever it may be, they're fairly compensated. And maybe they're paid doubles or triples during those overtime allotments, which is interesting. And just to be fair, one thing to also point out that I failed to mention earlier is that most of these game development studios do have mechanisms in place for overtime, where they do pay overtime to employees if they get approval, and they have certain walls set in place. So you can't just stay 80 hours in a week without anybody noticing. You have to go to your boss. You have to get clearance for overtime. They have to give you the thumbs up, and then you stay for overtime, and then they compensate you for that. So there are mechanisms in place in most of these studios. I just want to be fair and mention that. But going back to the analogy of the Screen Actors Guild or equity, that fixes a lot of issues for studios that can afford, or theaters that can afford to employ those people. So the direct analogy being that in the gaming industry, you would have developers that become members of a union, and then that union guarantees that programmers, that scripters, that graphic designers, that lighting designers, all of those people get guaranteed set amounts of money, either for their work or perhaps just a clause that's set to protect them against crunch during those deadline and during those crunch times. And that could potentially fix it. Maybe it's just a simple statement that everyone signs together saying that if we work over 40 hours in a week or over 50 hours in a week, you have to compensate us at 1.5 or 2 times the pay. And everyone signs it, everyone's happy. Once again, a lot of these companies have policies like that are already in place, but nonetheless, it's not a universal thing, so this potentially could help. If something like that were the case, it would be a very minor adjustment, but some people have suggested doing a complete union where you guarantee not just hourly rates if they're hourly employees, but salaried rates, all of that stuff. Now, that sounds like a great solution. Are there any downsides? Yes, which is why we're going to talk about those downsides, because it could be great to have game developers involved in a union, which guarantees them fair pay, guarantees them that they're protected during crunch times, that if they are forced to participate in a crunch time during development, that they are fairly compensated as a result. Now, what are the downsides? Well, if we go back to the acting example, what you end up with is a lot of theaters that simply will not work with equity actors, a lot of production companies that will not hire SAG-AFTRA actors simply because they're going to be more expensive. And so they would pursue actors who are not members of those unions because they're going to be more cost effective. Sometimes it's even on the calling list, which basically lists off all of the roles potentially and what those roles would entail, all of that. And then it will say, equity actors not welcome, or it will say only equity actors, you must be unionized, things like that. It just depends. The only way it works is if absolutely everyone agrees to it. The issue being, most of these companies, the big development companies, are international and have development studios in San Francisco like Rockstar and London. They have, if you're Ubisoft, development studios in Paris and Montreal and in the States. You have them all over the place. It's not as simple as just signing one unionized thing. It would have to be a global union of game developers, which is not easy to throw together, especially when you have to consider all of the labor laws for each country, some of which don't adhere to the same standards of other countries, wherein unionization would become very complicated, potentially even just outright impossible. So it's not a simple thing to fix or to tackle, which is why I think it's easy to talk about a solution like, oh, we need a union, easy peasy. It's not that simple. The other downside is that if a union were to raise the net cost of each developer, it's very possible that that could also increase the cost of games. It could lead to more game delays, which in turn would lead to increased costs. And if you think microtransactions and season passes, pre-order bonuses, that sort of thing are like heavy now, just wait till those costs skyrocket. Right now, those prices have been going up, and those money grubbing tactics have been going up because the natural cost, the organic cost of the product has been going up because it's been $60 as the standard for over a decade, while the costs have been going up exponentially. And they can't adjust for it, so they have season passes, DLC, that sort of thing to account for it. But once the cost of development actually skyrockets as a result of the labor increasing exponentially, then you'll see real cost improvements, or I guess failures and downsides. So it's not a simple solution. It's not something that can be easily fixed. And of course, I would like it for everybody to be happy, everybody to not be pushed past where they're comfortable, everybody to work 40-hour work weeks and be happy. And do what they want. But the reality is, for most people, this is a labor of love. And as a word of comfort and consolation, here's the thing. The market, in many ways, has a way of self-correcting for these types of abuses, if they actually are going on. So, for instance, look at the recent example of Telltale. Telltale was a game development studio that pushed its employees to the breaking point. And it was widely documented in the months and years leading up to the company's eventual closure, because they were forcing their employees to stay and basically be in perpetual crunch because they had episodic releases that would come one after the other, meaning that you never got out of crunch. You always had one new game to work on. You always had the next big thing. So it was very, very hard to account for. And the market corrected for it. The market caused them to eventually just collapse, and everybody left and quit. So once everybody left and quit, you had to bring in new people. Then those new people, they developed the games a little bit, but once again, it's far more expensive to get new employees as opposed to keeping old ones, so cost goes up. And then the new people realize, hey, you guys are abusing us, this isn't normal, we're going to go find another company that's going to treat us better. They leave. New people come in, they have to retrain them, get them back on schedule, make them situated to the point where they're comfortable. Most employees don't get to full performance until 4 or 5 months after initial hiring, depending on the industry. So in this case, you're looking at 4 or 5 months during crunch time of just revving somebody up and training them. That's not good. So costs immediately skyrocket again. But as a result of the cost increasing, crunch increases, the pressure increases, people leave again, and it just spirals. And eventually the company goes down because costs are too high, they can't hold on to employees, and sales eventually tank. The only time when that works is when you have a massive company that sells a massive game, and usually then after that massive game releases, the crunch lifts. For instance, with God of War, they ended up with a bunch of people going on vacation after the release of the game, where they got like 3 weeks paid vacation where they could just go do whatever they want before coming back and figuring out what they were going to do with the next game, which I think is the way that the market can naturally correct for these types of things. And so I suppose that's my word of consolation. It's a tough issue. It's a damned blasted issue. Crunch sucks, but there is no easy solution for it, especially when dealing in a global marketplace. And the only solution people tend to give out wouldn't actually work. It would actually potentially make things a lot worse, leading to unemployment and it being much harder to find a job for a lot of these developers. And on the other side, my simple solution tends to just be like, these things have a way of fixing themselves. Companies like this, if they are pushing their employees, those employees leave to go work for a better company. And that's what makes it so great, that there is that natural correction that can take place and you don't even have to really think about it. Everybody, like Telltale closed, all those employees were laid off, and then Ubisoft sent out a public message saying anybody from Telltale that wanted to could meet them in, I believe it was New York, maybe San Francisco, and they would buy them lunch and talk about employment opportunities. And apparently they've hired a lot of them on to their local studios. Like, this is a tight-knit industry. We hate this type of thing, but it doesn't do us any good to freak out about it, call for boycotts of the game that these people have been working on for years. It doesn't do us any good to just freak out and have that knee-jerk reaction. We have to be a little more balanced to it, a little more rational, or what word is it? Yeah, we have to be a little more reasonable. That's what I meant to say. But I am interested in hearing all of your thoughts and opinions on this. Let's try to keep it civil, because once again, this is a hot button issue. I expect there to be lots of very animated responses in the comment section below, and I cannot wait to read them or see them. So forgive me for my hoarse voice. Forgive me for the slight tardiness of this response to this issue, but nonetheless, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you got all the way through this, you're a scholar and a saint. I love you all, and I'm going to see you in the next video once all of this heals. Thank you for watching. I love you. Peace out. Bye bye.